Hey, so good morning. Today's daf is Masechet Bava Kamma daf Kaftet 29. We are at the two dots on the bottom of Kafchet. I'm a bet, and let me share my screen, and we will get started. So the Mishnah that we learned yesterday had a very cryptic comment. It had the cryptic opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says we had maybe I'll even begin with the Tanakama. The Tanakama said that if the person has a pitcher and it breaks in Rishus Harabim, in the public thoroughfare, and now someone gets hurt either because they get hurt on the spilled water, right? The pitcher was filled with water, and they get hurt because you trip, right? Water's slippery, or you bang yourself, you cut yourself on one of the shards, so the person whose pitcher it was has to pay for those damages. And so that's the question. So that was the Tanakama. And then Rabbi Yehuda said the owner of the pitcher is only liable when he has intent. What does that mean? What kind of intent are we talking about? And he's not liable when he didn't have intent. So we're going to pick up at the beginning of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, eighth line up from the bottom of 28b. And the Gemara is now going to explain what it is that Rabbi Yehuda meant. So, Hekidami Miskavin, what exactly did he mean by saying that you needed to have intent? So, Amar Rabbah, so this is answer number one, is offered by Rabbah. And he says, the Miskavin Laho Rida Lamata Miksefo. That the idea is did he have intent to try and take down the jug from his shoulder? In those days, you would take the jug and you'd sort of like put it on your shoulder, and that's how you'd carry it. And so the question was he trying to do something with the jug? Once we're going to say that he was trying to do something with the jug, if the jug then breaks, all right, so then we're going to have him responsible. But if he wasn't trying, yeah, maybe he wanted to drink some of the water. But if he wasn't trying to do anything with the jug, if it was just walking along and all of a sudden the jug just explodes and just breaks apart in his hands, well, then that's not something that's normal. That doesn't usually happen. And so as a result, he would be not liable. That's what Rabbah was saying. So Amrle Abaye says to Rabbah, listen, you want to try and say that we're talking about where that Rabbi Yehuda says that you would be liable only if you're using the jug, but not if you're just walking without using the jug. So then Miklal de Mechayev Rabbi Meir Afil Nishra. Well, that would imply that the Tanakama was disagreeing with him, right? The Tanakama would say that even if you're just walking along and all of a sudden your jug explodes, we're going to hold you liable. But that doesn't make sense. Is that really true? We wouldn't hold somebody liable for that case. So so Rabbah said back to Abaye, yes, Mechayev haya Rabbi Meir afilu ozna biyado, that even if all he's got is the handle in his hand and the rest of it just falls off, and as a result it breaks, yes, we're going to, according to Rabbah's understanding, we are going to say that the Tanakama says that he's liable. And the Tanakama, in our Mishnayot, when we don't say who it is, we attribute it to Rebbe Meir. And so Rebbe Meir would say that he's liable. But Amai, 1 second, why should he be liable? Anusu, he was a victim of something that happened that was completely unavoidable. The onus Rahmana Patre, and we generally have a rule that the Torah exempts people from liability when there's something unavoidable. And how do we know that? Well, we know it from a terrible situation, because Diksiv Ulana'ara Losa said davar, that to the young woman who was taken advantage of, we don't do anything. This is somebody who was committed adultery, but she was forced to do so, and we say that she is not liable for execution. And the reason that she's not is because she was anus, she was anusa, and so she was it was unavoidable. And so that's the story. And if you want to say that, well, maybe The only time we say you're not going to be liable in an unos situation is if, hold on just a second, only time you're going to be liable in an unos situation when you're unavoidable is when death is on the line. To paraphrase Princess Bride, but when it comes to damage, maybe you would be liable. That's not going to work either because Vahatanya, we have a rule. Nishbarakado below silko. If a pitcher broke and you didn't remove it from the public thoroughfare, nafal gamalo below hemido, your camel fell down and you didn't stand it up. Rabbi Meir Rabbi Meir says you're obligated for the damage that it does. And the Chachamim say, no, you're not liable for the damage that it does. They say, turning to Kaftet Amud Aleph, Pater Medine Adam, you're not liable within the realm of humanity, but God will hold you liable because you should take better care of your stuff. Now that's not yet the question part because we're going to see in a moment what Rabbi Meir agrees to the rabbis in a certain case, but the rabbis agree to Rabbi Meir that if you leave a something that ordinarily does damage like a stone, a knife, or a load, and you leave it on your roof, and it falls with a normal wind. So you should expect that kind of thing to happen. And now it falls down and it causes damage. Even the rabbis agree that that's that's a case of liability. And on the other hand, Rabbi Meir agrees with the rabbis that there's no liability. B'mala kankanim al hagag al manas lignagvan. That if you put jugs on the roof because you're trying to dry them, right? They're made out of these these containers. You put them on the roof because they're made out of clay, and you want them to dry. And then v'naflu baruch she'ena mitzuya v'hiziko, and now they fall with an abnormal wind and they cause damage. Shu patur, it's an abnormal wind, right? It was like a hurricane that came and blew them. You didn't know that you needed to expect a hurricane, and so that's the story. Yeah, it could have been 80 miles an hour wind or 100 miles per hour wind. It could have been really bad. That's not going to be your fault. We're not going to blame you for that. But if it's a 5 mile an hour wind that blows off your stuff, we're going to hold you responsible. So Ella Amar Abaye. So as a result, Abaye says, I don't agree with you, Rabbah. I'm going to come up with my own answer. And we're going to say that when Rabbi Yehuda says his issue about intent, he's talking about a double level machlokas. Now let's take a look and we'll see what he means. So Ella Amar Abaye Betarti Pliki. Actually, the Tanakama and namely Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda are arguing about two things. Pligi b'shas nefila. They're arguing about liability at the time that something fell. Upligi la'achar nefila, and they are arguing about damage after something fell. So what does that mean before something, at the time that something fell? So Tosos here, top Tosos on the Kaftet Amud Aleph, second line, it tells us what the meaning of at the time of the fall means. So Kol Kamma Delo, again, reading the second line of Tosos on Kaftet Amud Aleph, Kol Kamma Delo Havale Panai Lisalek. Anytime that you haven't had a chance to remove the object that has fallen, that is Karei Shas Nefila. That's called the time of the falling. So when you don't move it, so that's going to be one point of argument. And the next point of argument is after they have opportunity to move it, and you also don't move it. So those are the two times where we're going to see an argument between the Tanakama, who says liability, and Rabbi Yehuda, who says no liability when there's no intent. So what in the world do we mean by intent? Well, you're going to have to be patient because we're going to get there. So pligi b'shas nefila v'niskal poshea. They argue about a situation when somebody trips, whether that person who trips is considered negligent. Meaning, if I'm walking along, and I don't know about you, but every now and then I just trip. You just fall. Is that a situation where I should be treated as liable because I should just be more careful? Or do we say, no, that people just trip, and that's what they're debating about. The Tanakama says, we're going to hold you responsible. You are an adult person. You are a capable person. We're going to say that you need to be more careful about avoiding tripping. On the other hand, when it comes to Rabbi Yehuda says that presumably that the intent is that you actually have to somehow be negligent in your intention to fall. And so as a result, you need to have done something that would cause you to fall in order for you to be liable. So Mar Savar Niskal Posheahu, right? So the Tanakama says that the one who trips is negligent. Umar Savar Niskal La Posheahu. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you're not negligent. So pligi la'achar nefila b'mafkir nezakel. And then what about after the item has fallen? So then the question is then they're arguing about whether or not, what's the impact of making your object ownerless? Can you make your object ownerless? Can, after my thing falls, can I say, listen, I'm going to treat my object as ownerless because because I don't want to deal with it. I want to just leave it there in the public thoroughfare. So is that going to, what's the rule there? So again, we now continuing with the Gemara, Mar Savar Mafkir Nizakav Chayev. The Tanakama says, namely Rabbi Meir here, says that you're liable for holding it, you're still liable even if you make your own object ownerless, because it's tough luck. You owned it when it fell. You owned it when it was in pieces. It's going to be now your responsibility to deal with it and to deal with any damages. Umar Savar Pater. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you're not negligent. So umimai. So, and how in the world did you come up with this? Midikatani tarte. Right, it's based on the fact that the Mishnah references two different situations. That's how I know that we're going to talk about two different arguments, because there are two concepts that are raised in our Mishnah. One is slipping on the water that was inside the pitcher, and the second concept was banging oneself against one of the broken pieces of the container, right? We want to make sure that you don't do either of those things. So hainu hach. Exactly, you could hurt yourself. So hainu hach.
Maybe it broke because what happened?
Yeah, could. Oh. Yeah, maybe it had a hole or something like that. And so the question the point is that when it breaks, now I might have thought, as the Gemara says, hainu hach, I might have thought that these are two really just repetitions of the same case. But no, ella lav haki kamar. Rather, this is what the Gemara is trying to say. When is it that the water is likely to do the damage? The water is likely to do damage. It was likely to do damage based on the fact that based right away, the time that the water is likely to do damage. If you wait 5 minutes, the water will all seep in or evaporate, so it won't even be there. So that's the time that you have to worry about. And then when it comes to the shard, that stays around, and so that's referring to the situation after the fall. Okay, so that's the double machlokas, and that's the situation. So now the Gemara is going to ask and challenge Abaye's explanation, because look at the following: Umidmas nisan betarti, braisanami betarti. Well, we have our Mishnah. Our Mishnah dealt with water and shards, and we have the Brisa. The Brisa dealt with a broken pitcher and the fallen camel. So let's take a look. Since the Brisa dealt with two situations also, don't we need to say that the double machlokas is also in the Brisa? So demasnisim batarti, Brisa nami batarti. So since our Mishnah was dealt with two cases, presumably our Brisa dealt with two cases. Bishlam akado mishkachas la o b'shas nefila o la'achar nefila. So when it makes sense, when it comes to the pitcher, we can distinguish, right? The pitcher that fell that was talked about in the Brisa, we can distinguish between whether it's dealing with at the time of the fall or after the fall. But ela gemalo, We can understand why we might be worried about something, about there being liability at the time, after the time of the falling, because once you have failed to help your animal up, so then you have effectively enabled the bad situation to exist. But uh, um, b'mafkir nivlato, because we could say that we're talking about a situation where the owner made the camel's dead body. Let's assume that the camel died when it fell. That it made the dead body hefker. It made it ownerless, and so as a result, we can understand that that's the exact same machlokus that we have in our Mishnah, that the Tanakama says you're still liable even though you made it ownerless because it was yours when it fell, and Rabbi Yehuda says no, you're not you're not liable because you made it ownerless, and so as a result, it's no longer yours, and it's and it just belongs to anybody who wants it. But Ella b'shas nefila hechi mishkachasla. But how can we have an argument about any possibility for liability at the moment that the camel fell? You didn't do anything to make your camel fall. It just dropped dead. That's not your responsibility. At least at the moment, that's what we're seeing. And so, how could there be an argument about that case with respect to before, with respect to something that is that happens immediately upon the time of the fall, before you had a chance to clean things up? So, Amar of Acha could go into Abra b'Maya. No, we're talking about where the owner walked the animal through a slippery location. He walked the animal through a water place where there was water on the ground, and then the animal slipped and fell and killed itself. So derech surata dinahara, like when it walks along the banks of a swollen river. So hechidami. Well, 1 second. You want to say that we're talking about you walked in the wrong place, because if you're going to tell me that there was another way that the person should go, well then posheahu, he's negligent, and then he should be liable no matter what. There's no way he should be able to get out of it. And v'ida darka achrina, and if you tell me that there's no other way for him to walk, anusu, then he's totally exempt because there was nothing he could do about it. So that can't be. It can't be about the walking through the water. So we're going to come up with another situation. No, we're talking about a situation where the owner tripped and the camel tripped on the owner. So as a result, it's his tripping that really caused the camel to trip. And so as a result, we're going to treat the camel's tripping just like we treat his tripping. And what did we say about the person's tripping? We said that there's a machlokus. The Tanakama says tripping is considered negligent, and Rabbi Yehuda says tripping is not considered negligent. So therefore, that's why we're going to have the two possible cases of at the time of the fall and after the fall, even in the context of the camel. Okay, but the Gemara is not done. We still have another question. So mafkir nizakav my miskavenika, right? When we talk about a situation where somebody is going to make their object ownerless, so we're dealing with, again, after the fall. So either the item has fallen, it's broken, the water is now dealt with because it's after the fall, whatever, we're not going to worry about the water, and we have the shards. And now we have the machlokas between the Tanakama, who says that even if you make the shards ownerless, you're going to be liable. And according to the Rabbi Yehuda, if you make the shards ownerless, you're not going to be liable. But what was Rabbi Yehuda's language? Rabbi Yehuda's language didn't talk about ownerlessness. It didn't talk about making something hefker. It talked about having intent. So what is meant by that intention?
Isn't there a procedure to pronounce something ownerless? Isn't that called, you have to go to the bet din and pronounce oosh or something?
Yeyush. No, so that, I think maybe you're referring to Yeyush, where you give up hope on something. That's a lost object. But here, and I don't believe you need to go to Beit Din in order to do that. But the point is that you can make anything of yours ownerless essentially just by saying it. And so that would be the case that we're talking about. And so what kind of intent is Rabbi Yehuda referring to? So Maftir Nizakav, Mainim Skaven Ika. What kind of intent are we talking about? So Rabbi Yosef comes to the rescue of his student Abaye, and he says, "B'miskaven lizkos v'charaseha." When we talk about intent, what we're really saying is that the owner has the intent that he wants the shards. V'chein amar Rav Ashi b'miskaven lizkos v'charaseha, where he wants the shard. So the point is yes, he made it hefker, but he's hoping that he can still keep the shards. So essentially, what we're saying is that Rabbi Yehuda says that if the person is going to want back those shards, then we're going to definitely hold him liable, even though he then we'll hold him liable if he makes it ownerless. But if he truly makes it ownerless, then that's where he won't be liable. Okay, so Rabbi Lazar Amar, Rabbi Lazar says, or you can understand it as that only when he continues to want the shards, meaning that he has not made it hefker, that's where he's going to be liable. But if he actually makes it hefker, then he won't be liable. So that's the debate. Again, the Tanakama says if you make it ownerless, you're still liable. But Rabbi Yehuda says no. Even if you do make it ownerless, if you make it ownerless, then you will not be liable. Okay, so now we have the dispute between Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yochanan in connection with the meaning of this, of the jug and camel brisa in the context of the double machloket detailed by Abaye. Namely, Abaye said that our Mishnah dealt with both at the time of the fall and after the fall, and now we're going to read the brisa with that in mind. So Rabbi Lazar Amar b'shas nefila machlokes. Rabbi Lazar says that the argument in the brisa regarding the fallen jug or the fallen camel is dealing with at the time of the fall. So now, what is the implication of that? The implication of that is aval la'achar nefila mai. What's the implication for after the fall? Are you saying Dibri Akol Patur, that everybody says you're not liable? Rabbi Meir is very clear that you should be liable in that case, based on our Mishnah. Elamai Dibri Akol Chayav. You want to now say that everybody says that you're liable? But the rabbis are pretty clear in this brisa that you're not liable. So Elamai b'shas nefilo. So what does Rabbi Lazar mean when he says that they're arguing in that brisa at the time of the fall? It means b'shas nefilo, even at the time of the fall. V'kamash malan keda Abaye, and that he's basically saying that you should read this brisa exactly the way Abaye reads our Mishnah, and that's really how we reread that brisa over the last few minutes. Rabbi Yochanan says no. La'achar nafilas machlokas. Really, only after the fall is there the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis in the brisa. Aval b'shas nafila mai. So now, what are you going to tell me about the time of the fall? So divrei kol patur. You're going to tell me that everybody says you're exempt from liability. V'hamid amar Rabbi Yochanan lekaman. But we have a statement of Rabbi Yochanan coming up. Lo tema maslis and Rabbi Meir. Don't say. And this is in connection with a Mishnah that we'll learn, God willing, in over the weekend. So don't say lo tema maslisa. Don't say that our Mishnah that the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph is like Rabbi Meir. Da'amar niskal posheahu, who says that one who trips is negligent. Miklal de Rabbi Meir mechayiv, because that implies that Rabbi Meir would hold liability for the time of the fall. Elamai, what does Rabbi Mochanan say? Divrei Akol Chayav. So you're going to tell me that actually he would say that everybody says that you're liable at the time of the fall. The fact that we say about the Mishnah coming up that it's not like Rabbi Meir, Damar Niskal Posheahu, because he's the one who says that if you stumble, you're negligent. Miklal de Patre Rabbanan. That implies that the rabbis hold you're not liable. So that doesn't work either. The bottom line is, it seems like he would also say that they argue in both cases. This is what Rabbi Yochanan is saying when he says la'achar nefilas machlokas, that after the time of the fall, that's when they argue. So by the way, the Mishnah, okay. So this is what it says when it says that. So Elaha Kamma Hashmala. This is what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. The mafkir nizakav dahacha hu de patre rabbanan. It is specifically in this case where if you make something that's a hazard, ownerless, that you won't be liable. The anasu, because in this case the rabbis would say, listen, the tripping was not your fault. Right. And so as a result, the fact that you now have this broken jug in the street, you didn't do it on purpose. And so as a result, we'll let you make it ownerless and not have you be liable. However, aval maftir nizakav the alma mechayve. But if you go just put a knife in the middle of the street and say, you know what, I don't want to pick it up. I'm going to make it ownerless, and I'm going to exempt myself from liability. That is not going to work because you've done something intentionally. And so as a result, that's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. He's trying to highlight the fact that the machlokus in the brisa is only with respect to after the fall, and that's because only in that situation would the rabbis allow you to exempt yourself from liability. But in an ordinary situation where you had some responsibility beforehand with respect to the fall, so then we're going to say that you are going to remain liable even if you try to make something ownerless. Okay, so now we're going to have a debate regarding a debate regarding what happens if one declares something ownerless. So Itmar, mafkir nizakav, if you make your item that is going to cause damage ownerless, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar have a disagreement. Chad amar chayiv, v'chad amar pater. One says you're liable even if you made it ownerless, and one says you're pater. So lema manda mechayiv k'Rabbi Meir. Let's say that the one who says you're chayiv is actually like Rabbi Meir. I think I scrolled too far. My apologies. Here we go. All right. So one says, can we say that the one who says liable is like Rabbi Meir, and the one who says not liable is like the rabbis? So aliba the Rabbi Meir kule alma lo pligi. Now, really, everybody agrees what Rabbi Meir says. That Rabbi Meir says liable no matter what. Ki pligi aliba the rabbanan. Where they argue is according to the rabbis. Manda pater rabbanan. The one who says that when you make your item ownerless, you're not liable, well, then he certainly agrees with the rabbis, and it's just the simple understanding of our brisa. But the one who says that in an ordinary course you would remain liable, he would say the following. Ana de amre afilu l'rabbanan. I can actually say my statement even according to the rabbis, because ad kan lo patri rabbanan ela b'mafkir nizakav tahacha. That the only situation where we would allow somebody to make their items ownerless is where it's a situation like the jug that fell when the person tripped, where there wasn't really any he wasn't really careless, and so as a result, mishum de anusu, because he was the victim of an accident. About mafkir nizakav the alma mechayve. But if he actually had another kind of case where there was something that he was responsible for in the street, and there wasn't an unus situation, well, then you would not be able to declare the item ownerless, and you would not be able to exempt yourself from liability as a result. So tistayim de Rabbi Elazar hu de amar chayiv. Now, which one says which? So let's say, maybe we should say that Rabbi Elazar, because when we said that there's this machlokus between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, we didn't say which opinion said which. We just said one says liable, one says not liable. So let's say that it's Rabbi Elazar who says that you're liable. To Amar Rabbi Elazar Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, because Rabbi Elazar says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Shnei Dvarim Einem B'Shusa Shel Adam. There are two things that don't belong to somebody, but the Torah treats them as if they belong to somebody. The Eluhain, and what are they? Bor B'Rshus Harabim. If you dig a pit in the public thoroughfare, you are responsible. We're going to treat that pit as belonging to you. And if somebody falls in that pit, if something falls in the pit, you're going to be liable if it's an object that is that for which you're liable on pit damage. And similarly, we're going to say that if you have something that is chametz after the 6th hour of the day on the 14th day of Nisan, when you are no longer allowed to eat chametz, we're going to say that you're going to be liable for that. Even though the Torah says you can't own something. You can't own chametz after the 6th hour of the day. We're going to treat it as if it's yours in order to make you liable. So Tistayim, it certainly seems like we've now proven that Rebbe Lazar is the one who says liable. Rebbe Lazar, Hachi. But did Rebbe Lazar really say that he's liable? Rebbe Lazar, Ibcha. It looks like Rebbe Lazar said the opposite because of his teaching with respect to the following Mishnah. Ditanan hahovech as hagala b'rishos harabim. If you turn over dung in rishos harabim, meaning, as we're going to understand at the moment, you move the dung from right over here to right over here, and now somebody falls in the dung and gets themselves all dirty and ruins their clothes, etc. And now they're going to want to be paid for it because you didn't have the right to put it over here. That wasn't your right. Now some chayav b'nesko. So the person who moved it from here to here is going to be liable. So v'amar Rebbe Lazar, and Rebbe Lazar said about that case, Lo shanu elashnis kaven liskos bahen. The only situation where you're going to be liable for moving it is if you intended for yourself to take ownership of it. If you intended that you initially it's mine. You know what? I don't really want it. And then you put it down. Because remember, manure was a fertilizer, so you might actually want it. So about lonis kabelis kos bahan, but if you did not want to take possession of it and you moved it, well then patur, then you would be exempt. So alma mafkir nizaka patur. Doesn't this show that Rebbe Lazar says that when you take something and that's ownerless, and you make when you take something and you make it and it's a hazard and you make it ownerless, you're not liable? Because after all, that's the whole point. If you didn't intend to make it yours, you're not liable. So Amar Rav Ada Barahava, Shech Zero Lamakomo. No, you have to clarify the situation. When Rebbe Lazar says that you move the poop, it's not talking about the fertilizer. You're not talking about moving it from here to there, but rather you lifted it and then you put it back. You realize, I thought I wanted it, but you know what? I don't want it. And so as a result, you put it in the original position. And according to Rav Ada Barahava, here's the logic for why you're not liable if you didn't want to take ownership. Because Amar Ravina Mashal the Rav Ada Barahava. What case is like the case of Rav Ada Barahava of picking up the dung and putting it back down? What is it comparable to? You find an open pit, you cover it, and then you open it again because of the gilo, and so you open it again, and so as a result, now the pit is open, but it was open to begin with, and so as a result, you really haven't done anything. So Amar Le Marzutra Braidarav Mari Ravina. With second Ravina, you want to say that those cases are comparable? Midami, are they really comparable? Hasam Lo Istalik Lahu Ma'aser Rishon. In that case of covering the pit, you haven't undone the pit in the first place. The pit still exists, it's just under the cover. But hacha istalik lahu ma'aser rishon. When you pick up the dung is no longer there. It's not in the place of the rishos harabim any longer. So you've completely undone whoever put the dung there in the first place. So hello dummy. So the case is not comparable. Ela lamotzi bor megula utmama. The case that you want to really make it comparable to is that's where somebody finds a pit and you fill the pit. And so now that you fill the pit, because of a and now you dig it anew. So you've undone it. So as a result, that's the problem. And now it's going to be in your responsibility. If you find a pit in Rishus Harabim and you fill it in and then you dig it up, nobody's going to say that it's the first guy's fault. Everybody's going to say it's your fault. And so as a result, that's the case that's comparable. So if you tell me that you picked up the dung and you put it right back down, why aren't you responsible? So Ella Amar Rav Ashi, so Rav Ashi is going to clarify and give another answer. Why is it that you're not responsible if you pick up the dung and you put it back down? Because you didn't lift it up 3 tfachim. You didn't lift it up enough to take automatic possession of it. And so as a result, it's as if it was still there on the ground. Umay doke, the Rebbe Lazar. Well, 1 second. Why did Rebbe Lazar need to say that this Mishnah, right? I think it was a Mishnah, that this Mishnah, yes, this is a Mishnah that, again, that we're going to learn on tomorrow's daf. Why did he need to say that this Mishnah is talking about where you did not pick up the dung 3 tvachim and you put it back down and you intend to take ownership? Why not just tell us? And because the Mishnah is going to say you're liable. So why not just say that we're talking about a case where you lifted it up 3 tvachim, and so as a result, you took ownership of it, and now you put it back down? Why did it change the case to one where you only lifted it less than 3 tvachim? The time of Dakinis Kabin Luz Kospa. And why did you say that it was specifically that he intended to acquire the dung? Ha ein miskavin luz kospa lo, which implies that if you didn't intend it, you would not be liable. Lokama lamala mishlosha. Just say that we're talking about where you lift it more than 3. The avogad delonis kavin luz kospa chayiv. And even if you didn't intend to acquire it because you lifted it up more than 3, we're going to make you liable. So Amarava Masnisin Kashite. Actually, the Mishnah itself was bothering Rabbi Lazar because my area hafach. Why did the Mishnah use the terminology of turning over? It suggests not a full kind of lifting. So listening lahagbia, higbia. It should have just taught that you lifted it. So the fact that it used the language of turn over, elashmamina kol hafach lamata mishloshahu, that it's referring to some kind of lifting under 3 tfachim, that is considered turning over. So that's why Rabbi Lazar specifically dealt with that case. So in the end, we right now seem to have an ability to say that Rabbi Lazar is the one who says chayiv, and that would imply that Rabbi Yochanan says pater. So let's take a look. Umid Rabbi Elazar Amar Chayiv, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Pater. Okay, so now you told me that Rabbi Elazar says Chayiv. Well, what about Rabbi Yochanan? That implies that Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says Patur. That even if you say make something ownerless, if you make your item ownerless, well, then you won't be liable for it any longer in Rishus Harabim. So Umiyama Rabbi Yochanan Haki, but did Rabbi Yochanan say that? But tonight we got another Mishnah where Rabbi Yochanan is going to make a comment on it, and we're going to see that that's going to be problematic. And it seems like he does hold liability even when you make something ownerless. Hamatzniya as quotes if you hide a thorn or glass in the public, or you make your fence, which is on the edge of the public domain, out of thorns, the get gader shenafal Rishus Harabim, or your fence just happened to fall into Rishus Harabim, and in any of these cases, v'huzak behen acher, somebody else gets damaged, u'chayav b'nizko, you're responsible for the damage, for creating a damage-laden situation in Rishus Harabim. Eva Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo shanu ela b'mafriach. We're talking about only a situation where the thorns stuck out into Rishus Harabim. Aval b'mitzamtzem, if the thorns that you put your barbed wire in your property, and you put the barbed wire only so it goes to the edge of the property, so it doesn't stick into the public thoroughfare, well then patur, according to Rabbi Yochanan. So mitzamtzem my time of patur. Now, why are you not liable if you have it in your possession? If it's in your property, if you are you not liable? So lav mishum dahavule bor b'shu. So isn't it because that's like a pit in your possession, in your property, and we say that a pit in your property causes no liability. But that implies that a pit in Rishus Harabim, even if you make it ownerless, you would be liable. Alma mafkir nizak of chayiv. That shows that even if you make something ownerless and it's a hazard in Rishus Harabim, you are going to be liable according to Rabbi Yochanan. So, no, you haven't yet proven that Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says liable. We could still say that Rabbi Lazar is the one who says liable, and Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says no, not liable. Because la'oma emalach mafkir nizak pater. Maybe I could still tell you that Rabbi Yochanan would say that if you make your hazard in public ownerless, you won't be liable. My time of pater. And why is it that if you leave things in your own possession, you're not liable? Because instead, with respect to that, Amar Rav Acha Brei de Rav Ika Lefisha Ein Darkan Shel Bnei Adam Lehiskakek Biksalim, because people don't rub themselves against walls, and so as a result, you aren't liable, not because it's in your possession, it's in your rishus is because people don't rub themselves against it. And so as a result, people know not to do that. And so as a result, that's why you're not liable. But still, did Rabbi Yochanan actually say that you would not be liable if you make your item ownerless in public? Rabbi Yochanan, halacha kistam mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan says that the halacha follows mishnayos that are anonymous. Utnan, and we have a mission that says, Hachofer bor b'rishus harabim, if you dig a pit in rishus harabim, v'nafal otoko shor chamor umeis chayav, that if something falls inside it, you're liable. And you're liable even if you don't own the pit, and the pit is ownerless. So as a result, that seems to be clear that Rabbi Yochanan says chayiv for making something, that even if you make something ownerless, you're going to still be liable. All right, you've convinced us. So after all of that, we're going to actually say that Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says that if you make your item, that even if you make your item ownerless in the public thoroughfare, you're still going to be responsible for the damage that happens. So Olam Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev. I'm sorry. Hold on. Well, I'll tell you in a moment. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev. Rabbi Lazar Amar Pater. Well, 1 second. We already proved that Rabbi Lazar can't say pater because and now by the fact that Rabbi Yochanan is saying chayav, that implies that Rabbi Lazar says pater. V'ha'amar Rabbi Lazar said mishum Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Lazar said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael that there are two things that we put into your possession even though they don't belong to you, and one of them is a pit. So in Rishus Harabim, so how could we say that Rabbi Lazar is the one who says not chayav? He seems to say like Rabbi Ishmael that you are chayav. So we're going to answer the question in I guess one of the most obvious ways. Lo kashya hadidei hadarabe. No, you have to recognize that yes, Rabbi Lazar quoted Rabbi Ishmael and said in his name that there are two things that were the Torah is going to put in your possession even though you don't own them, and one of them is a pit in Rishus Harabim. But that doesn't necessarily mean he agrees with it. We have to have the ability to phrase it is an important lesson in life. We have to be able to have the ability to phrase the arguments of somebody else. We need to be able to say that this is what I learned from this person, that he says X, and even though I disagree. And so, in fact, what he's saying is this is what I learned from Rabbi Yishmael. Indirectly, I might add, because they didn't live at the same time. But I learned this indirectly from Rabbi Yishmael, and the point is that I don't necessarily agree with it. And so as a result, we now have the conclusion that Rabbi Yochanan says that you're liable even if you make your item ownerless, and Rabbi Lazar is the one who says no. If you make your item ownerless, you will not be liable. You will not be liable if you make your own item ownerless, even if it's in Rishus Harabim. So now that we've dealt with that, we've been dealing in the most recent and the early Mishnayot of this perek with sort of accidental cases, situations that weren't intentional. We're going to now turn to an intentional situation. What happens if you have the intentional placement of a hazardous condition in public? Well, for that, you're going to need to stay tuned to tomorrow's daf. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. So that's a good question. Let's take a look and see what the Ner Ein Mishvah Ner Mitzvah says with respect to who's right here. And let's take a look. And so hold on just a second. We're going to go back to take a look. And hold on. Okay. So we have we say, so one says that even if you make it hefker, you're liable, and that's the way we paskin. We paskin like in this particular case, based on what we've now said, we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, that even if one tries to make something that they owned ownerless and it was already in the public thoroughfare, you are still liable for the damage that you caused. So as a result, the person who wins is the injured person in that case. The person who got injured is going to be able to get their money in order to cover the costs of their injury. All right. I wish everyone a wonderful, wonderful day and a very Shabbat filled with shalom and good things. Have a great day and a great weekend. Oh, and last concluding thing. Next week, God willing, will all be recorded for me. I'm going to send the recordings in, and God willing, we'll have 3 days of recording because I am away all of next week. But God willing, I will be back after that. I'm going away for the first days of Hanukkah. All right. Have a great day, everybody.